Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you're tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and I'm so glad that you're here. Today, we've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to be talking all about plants that we're sowing and transplanting and moving about already here in March. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back. So it is March. I know it's been a while since I've done a recording for the podcast. I can assure you it's because we've been very, very, very busy here on the homestead. So we've been building hoop houses, which is coming up on the blog a little bit later this month. And we've been building those using the actual kind of drop plastic stuff that you use for when you're painting and decorating, just to try it out to see if it really works, because you know things like the greenhouse or the actual polytunnel plastic can be really quite expensive. So I wanted to see whether this was going to work as a much cheaper option. And of course, spring is almost here, so we've been really, really busy with getting our plants together and getting things started off indoors. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it with plants that you can be getting started right now. So first of all, we want to be sticking really with our cool weather crops this time of year. If we're going to be planting outside, we want to make sure that we're still providing some sort of frost protection to kind of keep the worst of the weather off. Certainly where I live here in Utah, winter is not done yet. This is kind of that time of year where we're going to be getting a lot of rain, we're going to be getting a lot of high winds coming in, and probably around the first week of May we're still going to get a snowstorm. So I need to make sure that I'm really focusing on cool weather crops and I still have some frost protection in place, okay? I can't be putting out my tomatoes and stuff just yet, even though I really want to. So what are cool weather crops? So I'm talking about brassicas and the 3 C's. So that's the cabbage, the cauliflower and the collards, and also kale. And also greens like Asian or Oriental greens, so they're leafy greens like pak choi, mitsuna, tatsoi, and mustards. And these are all very tolerant of cooler weather, and they can handle a bit of light frost. And some varieties of these plants that we're growing, I'll just run through the list of what we're growing here. So cabbages, we've got Greyhound, we've got Kalibos, which is a pointed red cabbage variety. And we've got an old French variety, which I'm sure I'm going to ruin the pronunciation of, is Quintal d'Alsace. And these are big, dark, leafy green cabbages, and I'm really excited to be growing those because they look wonderful. For cauliflower, we're growing Snowball, which are the white curds, and Purple of Sicily, which are kind of like the purple ones. So I'm really excited for those. My stepson helped me sow all those rather begrudgingly, but they've already started to come up, and we sowed them a week ago, and they've been sitting outside in the greenhouse in just one of those little seed starting trays with the plastic greenhouse cover on. So they're coming up really well. And the seedlings that are coming up for the Purple of Sicily ones are actually purple, so they look really cool. For kale, I've had really good success here in Utah growing Ragged Jack or Red Russian kale. It's the same variety, it's just got different names depending on where you're looking. This year I actually left my kale in the ground. I didn't cover it, I didn't do anything with it really. It's just kind of been hit by the elements, and the red Russian kale that I've left in there has gone this beautiful deep purple colour. It looks absolutely gorgeous, and you can betcha that I'm going to be letting that go to seed this year, and I'm going to be saving seed from it because that thing has stood the test of all that the Utah winter has got to throw at it, and it's done really well. So that one definitely warrants some seeds being saved from it. Also the Nero Toscana kale, which is also known as Dinosaur kale, it can be sometimes classed as an open cabbage or a leaf cabbage rather than a kale, but that one's grown really well as well. And it doesn't look anywhere near as pretty as the Red Russian kale or the Ragged Jack kale for sure, but that one has definitely stood up to the winter really well. We have had a lot of harvests off kale, and I've not grown loads of kale plants. I think I maybe had 5 plants for the whole of the year, and these things just keep producing. We've been picking them throughout the growing season. We kind of left them alone over summer because some of these kind of brassica cool weather crops can get a little bitter when the heat really gets to them, but I grew them in an area of the garden where they would get some shade over the afternoon, so that kind of helped a little bit. But some of the nice early variety of kale that we're growing is the Scotch curly kale, and it's this beautiful kind of real blue-green, crinkly leafed kale. And it's one that my auntie would grow in England, and I absolutely loved that kale. And weirdly, Sparky also loves to eat that kale, so I'm definitely going to be growing plenty of that. For pak choi, we're growing a couple of different varieties, and this is really the first time that I've ever grown pak choi, so I'm really excited to be trying that. So we're growing extra dwarf and Shanghai green. And these crops are, perfect for growing in very early spring when it's much cooler, because you can be harvesting those before the weather gets too hot and they start to bolt. Same with things like the Asian greens, like the Mitsuna and Tatsoi and the mustards. Those can get a little bit bitter and they'll start to run to seed very quickly as the weather starts to get warm. I grew some of these plants in England over the winter, and they did really, really well. So it's kind of nice to be able to try growing these again in spring and get a harvest before we're wanting to put out all of those warm weather crops. Some of the things that we're getting in right now is salads. So I'm trying a little bit of an experiment, and because we go through coffee like really, really fast here, I've got tons. I'm embarrassed to say how many coffee cans I've been saving for the last couple of months, really. And we go through like the big coffee cans too. But I've been saving those up, and I've started some of my salad mixes in there. And I've got a few heirloom salad mixes that I've picked up. So I've got things like European mesclun salad. I've got some Rocky Top salad mixes, which are kind of like these red leaves and things. I've got a couple more that are on order that are coming through. I really like a mixture of things in my salads, so those have worked really well. And all I do is I just kind of sow them very thinly in the coffee can and then cover them very lightly with some compost and then spritz them with water, and they've gone off like the clappers. They've grown really well. They're all now outside in the greenhouse under another layer. So I've got a greenhouse within a greenhouse, and they're growing really well. And the greenhouse is just one of those cheap pop-up greenhouses with like the plastic over them and the metal shelving, and they're doing absolutely fine in there. They're really growing strong, and I think in a couple of weeks they're going to be big enough for me to actually put them out into the main bed in the greenhouse and let them grow in there. But lettuce is actually surprisingly robust, and I've got some romaine that I saved from last year's seeds. those have started. They were the first things that came up, and that's one thing that I've noticed, where I've got seed that I saved versus like new seed that I've bought from, you know, the seed suppliers. But my personal saved seed comes up so much quicker than anything that I've bought, and that's really encouraging to see. But I've got romaine started, and there's a couple of like pretty winter hardy lettuces, or lettuce or salad greens really, that you can try. For lettuce, winter density is definitely a UK favourite, and they were very reliable for me to grow, and they kind of tolerate you know, the cooler weathers. You still have to cover them up, but they definitely tolerate it a lot more. You can also be sowing different salad greens like arugula, or rocket to us Brits, corn salad or mash. You got endive, radicchio, orish, that's mountain spinach, actual spinach. Like, we go through so much spinach here, and our favourites to grow are definitely the Bloomsdale Longstanding variety, and we quite like the Amsterdam prickly seeded too, and I like it because the seeds are a little bigger and they're easier to kind of handle, although they do look a little bit like those goat head things, so that can get a little mixed up, I guess, but no, they're definitely growing really well. We've got some leeks started as well, because they've got quite a long growing season. We had our leeks started in early February, late January. Same for our onions too. So our onions are already up and growing, and they're out in the greenhouse, within the greenhouse, so they're still kind of straggly seedlings at the minute. They're not the nice, you know, leaves yet, so I've just started feeding those because they've got their true leaves now, and they seem to be a lot happier now they're out in the greenhouse. We've got quite a few different varieties of leeks that we're growing. Some that I've never grown before, like Blue Soleils, which I just picked up from a supplier online like a few weeks ago. But I've also got a couple of varieties that I'm used to growing, like Musselburgh, which are a Scottish variety. And we've got American flag leeks as well, which I've never grown before. So I'm kind of excited to try those. Because I really like leeks in springtime, and I like to leave some in for to get bigger and grow for winter harvesting as well. Celery and celeriac, or celery root, have finally got their first set of true leaves now, and they've been in since January, indoors still. They haven't been moved outside, so they're under the grow lights. And I think now I've given them their first feed, they're going to start to perk up a little bit more, and with any luck, I can be transferring those to the greenhouse in the next couple of weeks, and they'll probably be going in the greenhouse within the greenhouse. And you know, as the weather starts to warm up a little bit, we can start rotating plants out of the second layer of cover to try and start that hardening off process. So that's exciting. Beets are one of those vegetables that you either love or hate. I love beets. They're one of my favorites. I love to have them roasted with honey and served cold with some goat cheese and mint sliced. They're great. But beets can be grown for the leaves as well, to have in salads, like baby leaf salads and stuff. And bull's blood is a great choice to do that, because they've got these beautiful red leaves that kind of make, you know, salads look a little bit more interesting this time of year. And beets are pretty quick to grow, and they do quite well in these cooler weather as well, but you still need to cover them. Still need to have some sort of frost protection on them, which is why, we've been building hoop houses, is to, get things out in the ground a little bit earlier than what we normally would. But now's a good time to be getting in some beets, and beets can be ready in about 50 to 55 days if you get the right variety. And some of those that grow quite quickly are things like Early Wonder, Cylindra, the albino or the white beet, and also some golden beets too. I like the stripy ones that look a little bit like a candy cane. And they're an Italian variety, and I'm probably not going to pronounce this right either, but they are called Chioggia. And they're beautiful, and they're always really interesting to like kind of serve up to people who, particularly in like the salad that I do, if people haven't really had beets before and they're quite apprehensive about it, I like to put different colours in there, and they're less averse to it, we'll say. Radishes are like the fastest root crop I've ever seen, and they can be ready in like 20 to 25 days if you get the right variety. We love to grow Cherry Belle and French Breakfast, and they're great to grow direct in the ground. And the great thing about radishes is because they come up so quickly, you can use them to mark out where you've actually sown some crops that take much longer to grow and germinate. And one trick that I learned in the UK was to grow radishes in the same place where I put my parsnips. So parsnips take a long time to germinate, and they take a long time to grow. I mean, parsnips can be taking anywhere from 110 to 120 days to mature, and they're always better after a bit of a frost. But one trick that my grandparents taught me was when you sowed your parsnip seed to also go in and sow some radish seed as well in that same spot, because your radishes are going to pop up and show you where you actually sowed everything, and they're going to be ready well before the space is going to be really needed for those parsnips and things. So that's a good trick to be able to get more out of the space that you've got, as if you can kind of, have multiple things growing in the same space and harvest those quick maturing veggies out before your other veggies get too big. So for parsnips, we've got some Guernsey half long and student varieties growing this year, and these you want to direct sow outside. They don't do well if you try to start them in modules and then transplant them later. They're kind of like carrots. They're just not happy, and they don't tend to grow when you do that. So you're always better off growing them directly into the soil. Beets, I've had people kind of, great success where they do it in a module and then transplant them out. I always like to direct sow them, but you got to do what works for you and works for your garden. But on top of the parsnips, we're also going to be growing some salsify and scorzonera roots, and those, I love the three of those roots together in things like a gratin or in a casserole. So I'm really excited to be growing those again. Some other good varieties to try are Javelin and Cobham improved parsnips as well. I like to kind of stick with a lot of the varieties that I'm used to in the UK. So this year's kind of a little different for me because I'm trying to grow some stuff that I'm not necessarily, used to growing. So that's quite challenging. And for turnips, I'm trying Golden Globe this year, which are a yellow variety. I've grown purple top white for a number of years in the UK, mostly because they always reminded me of the children's book, The Enormous Turnip. But turnips are a fabulous root crop for spring or fall. They're really good for beginners to try as well, and you can eat the tops and the bottom of the roots, so there's not a lot of waste. as well. And you can try them like when they're small, in salads, and or you can try them as a root crop when they're a bit bigger in the fall. And the wonderful thing about turnips is there seems to be like loads more varieties that are coming through. So I've got a couple of Asian varieties of turnips that I am awaiting to arrive. And I've never grown these particular types before, so I'm really excited to see how they compare to like what I would call like traditional veggies. So that's really exciting. But those grow really well, direct sow under a layer of frost protection at this time of year as well, because when things start to get too hot, things like turnips and rutabaga or Swedes, because they're part of the brassica family, as those temperatures crank up, they start to want to bolt and run to seed, so they'll start to flower, and then like things just taste nasty after they've flowered and stuff. But the chickens don't complain, so that's fine. Speaking of rutabaga, or Swede as it's known in the UK, definitely a fond favourite in England. I like to have it mashed up with carrots because that's how we seem to have it in England, which is weird, but we're not going to get into that. But we went to a friend's house a couple of months ago, and they served rutabaga as a mash substitute, like a mashed potato substitute, and it was delicious, absolutely delicious. So my husband now wants me to grow lots of rutabaga. So this season we're going to be growing Joan rutabagas, and they've got that kind of classic purpley top on them, and then like the yellowy underneath, so that'll be really interesting for us to try. Swiss chard has really surprised me here in Utah. I grew it in the UK for sure. It was like one of those easiest crops to grow and get a harvest from, and there's lots of different ways that you can eat it as well, and I'm still finding new ways to eat it. We've got quite a lot of it that we harvested throughout the growing season. I mean, I gave so much of it to the chickens as well, and the chickens absolutely loved it. And we've got pounds and pounds of the stuff in the freezer that we blanched, and we're still using in meals even now, which is fabulous. But I was really surprised as we were doing a tidy up over the last couple of weekends. The Swiss chard is still going strong, even after all the Utah winter has thrown at it. And for sure, those ones that I have had undercover and out in the main garden are going to be allowed to go to seed this year, and I'm going to be saving that seed. And like some of my favorites are those brightly coloured stemmed chard, and I like to have things that are a little bit of a surprise, so I like to grow the 5 colours silver beet chard, and I love the bright lights chard because they look so pretty in the garden. And when you've just got things that are green, I mean green's my favourite colour anyway, but having like those little pops of colour in the garden just really help make the vegetable garden look really pretty. So there are definitely a couple of varieties that, I would recommend that you give a go and try in your garden. And the great thing about Swiss chard is it also does really well in containers too. And, I've seen people that are growing them in those giant tower things on patios, and it just looks really nice. And they come in a big variety of colours as well. So you can have things from white stems all the way through to, yellow, orange and red, and then, like a really, really deep red. So they just look really, really pretty and are one of my favourite things to grow, which I never thought they would be, but they really are. And some of the other things that I love to grow are peas. And I never used to like peas as a kid. In fact, I hated peas. But now, after growing them and eating them straight out of the garden, oh my goodness, I can't get enough of peas. Peas, like fresh from the garden, are just so sweet and delicious. And they're great to grow early in the season, because actually when the temperatures start to get over 75 Fahrenheit, they stop producing. And there's lots of varieties of peas to grow. So there's a variety called Tom Thumb, and they are absolutely fabulous for growing in containers because they're very compact, bushy plants. I really love snow peas, and my favourites are Karubi de Masan. Again, I've probably not pronounced that right. I also like the golden sweet snow peas, which are like this yellowy green pod, and they're super sweet and delicious. Some typical garden peas that I like to grow are Kelvedon Wonder, Green Arrow, because I'm a comic book nerd, and the Lincoln garden pea has been very reliable at growing here as well. So I like growing a mixture of kind of like the snow peas, which I can get out really early, and I also like garden peas because I like to have them, just kind of steamed with a little bit of mint as an accompaniment to whatever meal we're having. So peas are a great crop to grow, and they're pretty straightforward as well, especially if you're a new gardener. Now carrots, let's move on to carrots. I've not had a lot of success with carrots, and the ones that I have had some success with have been Purple Dragon and Cosmic Purple carrots. Now, both of these are heirloom varieties. And when I say some success, I mean that like the biggest carrot that I've had was maybe 3 inches long. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Good Life. It was a show in the 70s in the UK, and it was about basically this couple who turned their backyard into a homestead, and they grew all of their own vegetables and fruit. They had chickens. They had a goat in their back garden called Geraldine. Chris won't let me have a goat, otherwise it would be called Geraldine, and it probably would live in the back garden. But there's an episode where they branch out and get an allotment, and they have their first harvest from the allotment, and it is all super tiny veg. I mean, this stuff's like maybe an inch in size. It's super tiny, and that is exactly how we felt every year. We've tried to grow carrots here. Like, we've not had a lot of success apart from the one carrot that went to seed, that we let over winter and run to seed the next year. So this year I'm going to be growing some of that seed from the carrots that grew longer than 3 inches when we left it in the ground. And we're going to also broaden our horizons with some different varieties. So I've been chatting quite a lot with some friends who can grow carrots, and they've had some good success with a couple of hybrid varieties called Bolero and Sugar Snacks. And I'm going to try those this year as well. So I'm going to change the bed that I'm growing them in, and I'm gonna grow them in a couple of places. I'm gonna be direct sowing them into one of the beds, one of the raised beds under a hoop house, and I'm also going to be putting some over in the test garden bed where it's very sandy soil, and I'm going to be putting them underneath some frost fleece, because this is like a good time to really kind of get them out in the garden and just give them a little bit of cover, and they should start to come up as the weather warms up. So I'm giving it another go. I am not giving up on carrots. If I manage to grow Brussels sprouts, and I've never been able to grow Brussels sprouts, then by heck, I am not going to let carrots defeat me. So carrots are definitely quite temperamental for me to grow. But that doesn't mean that I'm gonna stop. So I like to diversify in the garden in the varieties that I grow, but also the amount of stuff that I'm growing. So I like to grow lots of different veggies, because that way, if something fails, like the carrots, then I've got another vegetable that's going to be able to take its place. So whether that's kind of one of those rock star veggies that I talked about in a previous episode on the podcast, or if it's something that we typically grow all the time, like tomatoes, and we just want to try a different variety instead. Speaking of tomatoes, so we've got a bunch of them that are just starting to emerge in the seed trays. Just like peppers, we're starting those indoors, like they are not ready to be going out yet here. And I've mostly got tomatoes growing from seed that I've saved from the garden in previous years. I've got a couple of new varieties that I'm going to be trying this year, and those include Black Crim and Black Icicle, and also Jersey Devil. And the Jersey Devil fruits look really kind of cool. They look almost like a pepper because they're kind of pointed at the end, so that's exciting. And I've got some new tomato heirloom varieties which are on the way, because I did a donation recently to a local community garden, and I gave away a lot of different seeds, and some of my more productive plant seeds that I had, like Romas, I gave some of those away for the community gardens to try and grow, along with a bunch of other seeds. So I've now diminished my seed stash quite a bit, so I need to replace it by buying some more exciting varieties. But I've got some kind of early season tomatoes that I'm going to be trying, so they're going to be on the way. And Chris wants to try growing tomatoes in straw bales this year. So I want to make sure I've got plenty of tomatoes started. Number one, because I want to be able to much later cold snap, or if we have a problem with the wood lice again, or the roly-poly pill bugs eating our transplants going out. So that's one reason, but also because this is a little bit of a gamble growing in straw bales this year, because we've never done it before. I want to make sure that I've got tomatoes growing in some of the raised beds that I know are gonna produce. And because tomatoes are such a big part of like what we eat as a family, and we always can and preserve a bunch of tomatoes to use like throughout the year. So we make loads of pasta sauce and salsa, and like crushed tomatoes to use in different recipes, like when I'm making curry and stuff. So like tomatoes are a huge part of what we eat. So I know that I need at least 12 tomato plants to be able to provide enough fruit for us to can and preserve to last us throughout the year. Peppers are also another warm weather crop that we've got started, and peppers take a long time to germinate. So we've had these started since kind of mid-January, and they're definitely coming on now. Just recently gave them a little bit of a feed with some of the homemade liquid fertilizer, and they're doing a lot better now. So the thing about peppers and tomatoes, like you want to have like well established transplants when you're moving them outside. So you want things that have got like good thick stems, there's like plenty of growth on them, they're nice bushy looking healthy plants, because they're going to be the ones that are going to adapt much quickly when you've transplanted those, and they're going to be growing well and hopefully producing. So peppers have been a little bit hit and miss for us actually the last couple of years, and even when we've bought transplants from the nursery that have been bigger and quite far along, we've not always had a decent harvest of peppers. So this year, Chris asked me to do a lot of peppers. And we've got a mixture of hot and sweet peppers, and we've got loads of different varieties started. So I've got like emerald and canary and rainbow bell pepper varieties. We've also got cayenne peppers, Chinese 5-color hot peppers, lemon drop hot peppers, which are like these like little yellow pepper things that look deceptively delicious, but I think pretty hot. And then we've got jalapenos, habaneros, Anaheims as well. And probably a couple of others that we're wanting to grow. Like, I really like the idea of having ornamental peppers in some of the containers to grow. See whether we're going to get a better harvest from them this year. So, you know, we've grown lots of different varieties, you know, over the last couple of years, but a lot of them we've actually had from the nursery rather than ones that we've grown ourselves. So like last year we had Anaheim peppers from the nursery, which didn't grow very well at all. But in previous years, I've actually had Anaheim peppers that I've grown from seed that have done really well, you know, when I lived in a different area around the valley. So, you know, I know that I can grow peppers. They're not like carrots. But I think we've just had a bit of a rough year with them because a lot of other gardeners have said the same thing. Their peppers haven't been great. So going to be growing lots of them, and we're going to see if we can get a better harvest growing some in containers, as well as some in the raised beds, because we've got a lot of like leafy green veggies this year that are actually going to be taking up quite a bit of space, you know, within the garden. So actually being able to grow some stuff in containers is going to help free up some space. And really, by no means least, we've got a lot of herbs and flowers started, and broccoli. I forgot to mention broccoli. Broccoli is a cool weather crop, but that can, you know, you can get some varieties that are hybrids, which mature much faster than some of the others. So we've got a mixture of broccoli that we're growing this year. So I really like the purple sprouting broccoli, but that'll be a crop that we harvest the following year. And we've also got Romanesco broccoli that we're trying to grow again. So we've not had a lot of success with growing like the big heads of broccoli like you see in the grocery store. So we are going to be trying a couple of hybrid varieties just to see if we can get those to grow. Because I want to see whether it's how we're growing it rather than, you know, the variety that's the issue. So we'll see if we can figure that out this year too. But back to the herbs and flowers, I've got loads that are already started in the greenhouse, and you know, we've got some indoors like basil I've started indoors in yet another coffee can. And, you know, we use a lot of herbs in our cooking, and one of the wonderful things that we did last year was we saved and dried a lot of our own herbs, and we've been using those all throughout winter in various soups and stews, and it's just been really nice to, you know, add something that you grew yourself. I mean, we did fish not too long ago, you know, like baked in foil, and we had, you know, parsley and stuff that we'd grown in the garden. It was wonderful. So I want to do that again this year, and we're growing a lot more flowers this year because of the bees. And you've probably heard me say before, if you follow this podcast quite a lot, but there's not a lot growing in my, you know, direct, you know, neighborhood, and there's not a lot of gardens. There's definitely not a lot of flowers. Like, really, some of the biggest, you know, flowering that happens really is when some of the trees flower. And there's a horse chestnut tree not too far like a couple of doors down from where I live, and I know that the bees go there all the time, because when that thing blooms, it really blooms. And we've got a lot of flowers that we grow in our garden already. So we've got things like the buddleia or the butterfly bush, and I have like milkweed growing, so we have butterflies visit. We have hummingbirds that visit the runner beans and the bean plants that are growing. So I like to make sure that we've got lots of different flowers, because it's not just good for the bees, but it's also good for the birds and some of the other pollinators that we have. So I've got a mixture of annual and perennial flowers and herbs that I'm going to be growing from seed. And the reason, really the biggest reason why I'm growing them from seed, is because we've got new flower beds that we're putting in the front yard and also in the backyard, and just because of the sheer size of those beds, it's going to be much more economical for me to be able to grow them from seed and then transplant them out. As it's going to be really expensive if I'm buying transplants from the nursery to then plant out. So that's what we're currently working on in terms of getting things growing, and I hope that this episode has inspired you to, get some plants started, get some seeds sown if you haven't already. So I would love to know what you've got started or that you want to get started growing in your garden. You can jump over to Facebook and come find us there. And come say hey and let me know what you're wanting to grow. Or you can hop on over to the website, and I'll pop a link in the show notes, and just come over there and say hi and find out what you can get growing and find out a little bit more about frost protection over there. Until next time, I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and I hope that your garden grows wonderfully this year. Bye bye. This podcast uses the song Exhilarate by Kevin MacLeod from Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. The song is used for both the beginning and ending credits.